Texas, a vast land known for its tough laws, and the site of more than 580 executions since 1976. That's more than any other state in the country. But among the hundreds of names that entered the death chamber, a few left behind shadows darker than any sentence, who lit a deadly fire to erase every trace, who wiped out an entire family in just one night, and who, standing before the final injection, remained eerily silent. In today's video, you'll hear about the 10 most brutal death row inmates ever executed in Texas. You'll also find out what they chose to eat and say moments before death. Before we begin, leave a comment below. Which country or state are you watching from? Let's see how far these stories have reached. And you, are you ready to face the truth? First, Abel Revill Ochoa, Dallas, on an August afternoon in 2002, inside a small house on Salerno Street in the Oak Cliff neighborhood. A family tragedy unfolded. It shocked the entire community. Abel Revill Ochoa, 29 years old, shot and killed 5 members of his own family. The victims were his wife, 2 daughters, father-in-law, and sister-in-law. Another sister-in-law was seriously wounded but survived. Ochoa was born in Vicente Guerrero, Mexico. He moved to Texas as a child and became a U.S. citizen. He had worked as a heavy equipment operator and had no criminal record, but around the year 2000, he became addicted to crack cocaine. He tried many times to quit but failed. On August 4th, 2002, the family attended church together. Afterward, Ochoa convinced his wife to give him $10 to buy drugs. He smoked crack in the backyard, then felt a powerful craving. Knowing his wife wouldn't give him more money, he grabbed a loaded 9mm Ruger handgun. He walked into the living room where his family was gathered and opened fire. His wife, Cecilia, 32, daughters Crystal, age 7, and Anahi, just 9 months old, were killed. So were his father-in-law Bartolo Alviso, 56, and sister-in-law Jacqueline Sala, 20. Another sister-in-law, Alma Alviso, 27, was severely injured. She survived after 3 months of medical care. After the shooting, Ochoa took his wife's ATM card and drove to a nearby mall. He tried to withdraw money but failed. He was arrested at the scene. At trial, Ochoa pled guilty. He claimed drugs had clouded his mind, but the jury was not convinced. On April 23, 2003, he was sentenced to death. Ochoa spent nearly 17 years on death row. He expressed deep regret and turned to faith before his execution on February 6, 2020. His final words were, "I want to thank God, my Father, Jesus Christ, for saving and changing my life. I'm sorry to my wife's family for causing this pain. I love you like the sisters I never had. Thank you for forgiving me." Ochoa's case is a grim reminder of how drugs and domestic violence can destroy families. It also raises questions about redemption and forgiveness in the justice system. Second, John William Hummel. Kennedale is a quiet suburb outside Fort Worth, Texas. But in December 2009, a horrific family tragedy shattered that peace. John William Hummel, a former U.S. Marine, murdered his pregnant wife, 5-year-old daughter, and wheelchair-bound father-in-law. The case shocked the entire public. Hummel worked as a hospital security guard. He lived with his wife Joy, daughter Jody, and father-in-law Clyde Bedford. He had no history of violence, but his life began to fall apart after he started an affair with a married woman. When he learned his wife was pregnant, he decided to kill his family and start over with his lover. On the night of December 17, 2009, Hummel attacked his wife with a blunt object. He then used brutal force on his daughter and father-in-law. After the murders, he set the house on fire to destroy the evidence, but investigators quickly discovered the truth. The victims had been beaten to death before the fire. At first, Hummel denied everything, but after being caught near the California-Mexico border. He confessed. In 2011, Hummel was sentenced to death for murdering his wife and father-in-law. One detail sparked controversy. His defense attorney later became a prosecutor in the same office that charged him. That raised concerns about a conflict of interest. Hummel's execution was delayed in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it was carried out on June 30th, 2021. His final words were, "I truly regret killing my family. Thank you for all the prayers for my family over the past few days. I love every one of you." His case raises painful questions about the mental toll of war, the support systems for veterans, and how the justice system treats those with a military past. It also forces us to ask, how can a father, a husband, turn so brutally against the people he once vowed to protect? Third, Rick Allan Rhoades, Pasadena, Texas. In September of 1991, just one day after being released from prison, 27-year-old Rick Allan Rhoades committed a brutal double murder. He took the lives of two brothers, Charles and Bradley Allan, in their own home. The case shook the local community and became one of the most disturbing crimes in Texas criminal justice history. Rhoades had a criminal record for burglary and theft. He was released on September 12, 1991, instead of reporting to a halfway house as required. He took a bus to Houston and wandered around his old neighborhood. In the early hours of September 13th, he encountered Charles Allan outside his home after a heated argument. Rhoades followed Charles inside. There, he attacked him with a metal rod and a knife. When Bradley Allan heard the noise and tried to intervene, Rhoades assaulted him too. After the killings, Rhoades fled. He took the victim's money and clothing. The brothers' bodies were discovered the next morning. The scene horrified the community. At first, police had no leads, but weeks later, Rhoades was arrested for breaking into an elementary school. During questioning, he confessed to the murders. He claimed he acted in self-defense. In his 1992 trial, Rhoades was sentenced to death for murder, over nearly 3 decades on death row. His lawyers filed multiple appeals. One argued that racial bias tainted the jury selection. All appeals were denied. On September 28, 2021, Rhoades was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. He declined to give any final statement. Family members of the victims, including Bradley Allan's daughter, were present. She said witnessing Rhoades' death brought a sense of justice. The case of Rick Allan Rhoades is a stark reminder of the dangers of repeat offenses and the gaps in post-release supervision. It also raises questions about rehabilitation and re-entry for serious offenders. Fourth, Carl Wayne Buntion, Houston, June of 1990. A routine evening turned into tragedy when police officer James Barbee, 37 years old, was shot and killed during a traffic stop. The shooter was Carl Wayne Buntion, a 46-year-old man with a long criminal history. He had just been released after serving 13 months of a 15-year sentence for sexually assaulting a child. On June 27, 1990, Officer Barbee pulled over a vehicle for a traffic violation. As he spoke with the driver, Buntion, who was in the passenger seat, suddenly stepped out. At close range, he opened fire. When Barbee fell, Buntion continued shooting from behind. He then fled the scene, firing at bystanders and attempting to steal a car. He was caught in a nearby building shortly after. Buntion had a violent past. Born in 1944 in Harris County, Texas, he grew up in an abusive home. His father had committed murder and often beat his family. Buntion himself suffered broken bones from the abuse. He began committing crimes in 1961, including theft, drug possession, and assault. In 1971, his twin brother was killed by police in a shootout. Buntion was believed to have sworn revenge. In 1991, Buntion was sentenced to death, but in 2009, The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the sentence. They ruled the jury hadn't heard key mitigating evidence. In 2012, he was sentenced to death again, over more than 30 years on death row. Buntion had only 3 disciplinary actions. The last, in 1999, his lawyers argued that he was no longer a threat, and that executing an elderly reformed man was inhumane, but all requests for clemency were denied. On April 21, 2022, Buntion was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. He became the oldest inmate ever executed in Texas. His final words were, "I want the Irby family to know that I truly regret what happened. I pray they find peace." Outside the prison, dozens of officers and former officers gathered. Many revved their motorcycle engines to honor their fallen brother. Buntion's case raises hard questions about justice, forgiveness, and whether the death penalty should be applied to elderly inmates. It also reminds us of the lasting pain violent crimes bring to families and communities. 5th, Kosoul Chanthakoummane, McKinney, Texas. In July of 2006, on a sweltering summer day, 40-year-old real estate agent Sarah Walker was found brutally murdered inside a model home she was showing. The case quickly drew public attention due to its violence and the controversy surrounding the death sentence given to Kosoul Chanthakoummane, who was convicted of the crime. Kosoul, born in 1980, was the son of Laotian refugees who came to the United States after the Vietnam War. He had a prior conviction for kidnapping and robbery in North Carolina and was on parole when he moved to Texas. On the day of the murder, Kosoul claimed his car had broken down, and he entered the model home to ask for water. However, his DNA was found at the scene, including under the victim's fingernails and on other surfaces. A bite mark on Sarah's neck was also said to match his teeth. But the investigation and trial drew heavy criticism. The bite mark analysis and testimony from hypnotized witnesses were seen as unreliable and outdated by modern forensic standards. Kosoul's lawyers argued that the DNA could have been transferred without direct contact, and that the forensic methods used were flawed. Still, courts upheld the death sentence. On August 17, 2022, Kosoul was executed at the Huntsville prison before the lethal injection. He thanked God, his pastors, and those who had supported him through his journey. He said, "I pray that my death brings peace to the Walker family." But at his request, a Buddhist monk placed his hand on Kosoul's chest and read scripture as the drugs began to flow. Kosoul looked through the glass at his mother and said, "Mom, I love you." He was pronounced dead at 6:33 p.m. Notably, the victim's father, Joseph Walker, publicly forgave Kosoul and opposed his execution. He said, "I hold no hatred toward him. I didn't want him to be put to death." 6th, John Henry Ramirez, Corpus Christi, Texas, in 2004, on a humid summer night. 46-year-old convenience store worker Pablo Castro was taking out the trash after his shift. He was suddenly attacked. John Henry Ramirez, then 20 years old, had been on a 3-day binge of drugs and alcohol. He stabbed Pablo multiple times and stole just $1.25. After the murder, Ramirez fled to Mexico and lived in hiding for 4 years before being captured and extradited to Texas in 2008. Ramirez was sentenced to death, but his case became the center of a national legal battle. He requested that his pastor be allowed to lay hands on him and pray aloud during his execution. Texas denied the request, which led to the case Ramirez versus Collier. In March of 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Ramirez's favor, affirming the religious rights of inmates during execution. On October 5, 2022, Ramirez was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison before his death. He apologized to the victim's family. "I have regret and remorse. This was a heinous act. I hope this brings you comfort." He also addressed his loved ones. "I fought the good fight, and I'm ready to go." Pastor Dana Moore, who had guided Ramirez spiritually, placed his hand on Ramirez's chest and prayed. "Grant John peace. Grant all of us peace." Ramirez's death not only closed a murder case, it opened deep questions about justice, forgiveness, and religious freedom. The documentary I Am Ready Warden, nominated for an Oscar in 2025, chronicled Ramirez's final days and his search for redemption. In a rare moment where law, faith, and humanity met, Ramirez left this world with a prayer on his lips and his pastor's hand over his heart, a haunting end to a tragic life. 7. Tracy Lane Beatty, White House. A small town in East Texas. In November of 2003, 62-year-old Carolyn Click was found dead and buried in the backyard of her mobile home. The killer was her own son, Tracy Lane Beatty, who had recently been released from prison for assaulting a child. The relationship between Beatty and his mother had long been strained and violent. Neighbors said Carolyn had once been beaten so badly by her son that she was believed to be dead. Still, she hoped for reconciliation and allowed him to move in with her in October of 2003. But just 1 month later, tensions rose again. On November 25th, Carolyn told neighbors she had asked her son to leave. That was the last time she was seen alive. Beatty later admitted that. After drinking alcohol, he and his mother argued. He strangled her to death. He then buried her in the backyard and used her credit card to buy drugs and alcohol. At his 2004 trial, he was sentenced to death for committing murder during the course of a theft. His defense argued that he had lived with his mother and had no intent to steal. Over the years, Beatty and his attorneys filed many appeals. They claimed he was mentally ill and not fit for execution. Mental health experts said Beatty suffered from complex delusions. He believed people were torturing him through a device implanted in his ear, but courts refused to allow a full psychiatric evaluation, citing safety concerns about removing his handcuffs. On November 9, 2022, Beatty was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison before his death. He spoke to his wife. "I don't want to leave you. I'll see you on the other side. I love you." He also thanked his fellow inmates and said, "I've made peace with the Almighty." Beatty's case is a tragic story of a broken family, torn apart by violence and addiction. It also raises questions about how the justice system handles offenders with mental illness, and whether true justice can be served when these factors go unaddressed. 8. Stephendale Barbee, Fort Worth, Texas. In February of 2005, Lisa Underwood, a 34-year-old bakery owner, was more than 7 months pregnant. She and her 7-year-old son Jaden vanished just before a baby shower planned by her friends. Police found blood in Lisa's home, but there were no signs of forced entry. Her vehicle was later discovered abandoned in a creek. The windows were down, and a bottle of cleaning solution was found in the trunk. Stephen Barbee, 37 years old, a successful businessman and Lisa's former boyfriend, became the prime suspect. Barbee initially confessed. He said he was afraid his wife would find out about the affair and the unborn child, so he killed Lisa and Jaden to keep it secret. Later, he recanted the confession, claiming it was coerced and blaming his business partner. Despite his claims, the bodies of Lisa and Jaden were found in a shallow grave in Denton County, linking Barbee directly to the crime. His trial lasted just 3 days. In 2006, he was sentenced to death. Over the following years, Barbee filed several appeals. He argued that his attorney had admitted guilt on his behalf without his consent, and that his physical condition made execution cruel. Barbee had limited mobility in his arms and shoulders, which made it hard to lie flat for the injection. Despite this, his appeals were denied. during the execution. It took longer than usual to find a suitable vein, and the process lasted over an hour. On November 16, 2022, Barbee was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. His final words were, "I just want everyone to have peace in their hearts, do everything for the glory of God. I'm ready." And he did not mention Lisa or Jaden, and never looked toward the victim's family, who watched from behind the glass. Barbee's case is a heartbreaking reminder of how fear and deceit can lead to the loss of innocent lives. It also raises concerns about how the legal system treats physically impaired inmates and whether executions respect religious and medical needs. 9th, Robert Allan Fratta, Atascocita, Texas. In November of 1994, 33-year-old Farah Fratta was shot and killed in her garage after returning home from a date. The case drew immediate attention when the main suspect turned out to be her ex-husband, Robert Allan Fratta, a former Missouri City police officer. Fratta and Farah were locked in a bitter divorce and custody battle over their 3 young children, according to court records. Fratta told friends he wanted his wife dead so he could avoid paying child support and win custody. He hired Joseph Pristash as a middleman, who then recruited 18-year-old Howard Guidry as the gunman. Guidry shot Farah twice in the head as she stepped out of her car. Meanwhile, Fratta created an alibi by taking his children to church. The case stalled until Guidry was arrested for an unrelated bank robbery. The gun found in his backpack was linked to the murder. Pristash's girlfriend also came forward, revealing details of the murder-for-hire plot. All 3 were arrested. In 1996, Fratta was sentenced to death. That sentence was overturned in 2007 due to procedural issues, but he was retried and sentenced to death again in 2009, for nearly 30 years on death row. Fratta maintained his innocence and challenged the use of expired drugs in executions. All appeals were denied. On January 10, 2023, Fratta was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. He made no final statement and didn't look toward the victim's family. His eldest son and Farah's brother were present for the execution. Andy Kahan, representing Crime Stoppers of Houston, called Fratta a coward for refusing to admit guilt or offer any apology. Fratta's case is a clear example of cold, calculated murder driven by personal gain. It also shows the persistence of the justice system in carrying out a sentence, even if it takes nearly 3 decades. 10th, Wesley Lynn Ruiz, Dallas, Texas. In March of 2007, a red and gray 1996 Chevrolet Caprice with tinted windows and chrome rims drew the attention of police. It was suspected to be linked to a homicide. When spotted, the driver, 27-year-old Wesley Lynn Ruiz, fled, triggering a high-speed chase through city streets. The pursuit ended when Ruiz lost control and crashed into an embankment. Dallas police officer Mark Nix, 33, a U.S. Navy veteran, approached the vehicle and struck the passenger window with his baton, demanding Ruiz surrender. As Nix made a small opening in the glass, Ruiz fired a single shot from inside. The bullet struck Nix's badge, shattered, and a fragment caused fatal injuries. He died at the hospital shortly afterward. Ruiz was arrested at the scene. With the weapon resting on his lap, he claimed self-defense, saying he thought police were shooting at him. But the jury rejected this. In 2008, he was sentenced to death for capital murder. During his time on death row, Ruiz and his attorneys filed several appeals. They argued that racial bias influenced the jury and that an expert witness gave false testimony about Ruiz's risk of future violence. The courts dismissed these claims, citing procedural grounds. On February 1, 2023, Ruiz was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville prison. In his final words, he said, "I'm sorry to Mark and the Nix family for taking him from you. I hope this brings you comfort." He thanked his family and friends and told his children, "Stand tall and keep making me proud." He was pronounced dead at 6:41 p.m. Ruiz's case is a painful reminder of how one reckless decision can destroy 2 lives. It also raises concerns about racial bias and flawed expert testimony in the justice process. 10 names, 10 blood-stained paths that ended inside the cold walls of the death chamber. But when the lights go out, is justice truly served with more than 580 executions since 1976? Texas continues to remind America of the price of crime and the questions that never have easy answers. Who can truly offer forgiveness, and is death ever enough? If you believe these stories deserve to be told, share your thoughts below. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the mysteries in the dark are far from over.